In 1587, Governor John White led a group of men, women, and children from England to establish the first civilian English settlement in the Americas. To take them across the Atlantic Ocean, they hired a private Portuguese ship captained by Simon Fernandez. Among the colonists was John White's own daughter, Eleanor, who was pregnant with a girl to be named Virginia, the first European-born in America. Their plan: to set up a trading colony in Chesapeake Bay. Queen Elizabeth had already sent 3 military groups in previous years. The colonists were to pick up a contingent of 12 soldiers from an outpost on the island of Roanoke along the way for protection, then continue to Chesapeake Bay. However, when they arrived at Roanoke, they found the outpost completely abandoned, along with the unburied skeleton of one of the soldiers. Upon this realization, Captain Fernandez decided he no longer wanted to honor his agreement to take the colonists to Chesapeake Bay, and instead abandoned them on the island of Roanoke, claiming the weather was too harsh to take them the rest of the way, refusing to let any of them back on the ship except for Governor White. It was already summer, too late in the season to plant sufficient crops. The colonists had very little food to survive, but Governor John White promised to return in a few months' time with supplies. He secretly instructed them that if they had to leave, they were to take refuge with the Croatoan natives, carving the word Croatoa into a tree as a sign. And if they had to leave under duress, they were to carve a Maltese cross as well. Before arrangements to resupply could be made, England entered a war with Spain, and Queen Elizabeth recalled all naval vessels for the war effort. It wasn't until 3 years later, in 1590, that Governor John White could return to check on his daughter, calling in a favor from his friend, privateer Captain Spicer. When approaching the island, they saw black smoke coming from both Croatoa and Roanoke, a signal used by the Croatoan natives as an invitation to trade. Assuming this was a sign the colonists were still alive, John White pressed towards the island. However, a terrible storm descended upon the ship, causing 7 sailors to drown, including Captain Spicer. The crew, seeing this as a bad omen, wanted to return home, but John White insisted, convincing a small party to accompany him to the island. They eventually arrived to Roanoke at dusk. Instead of immediately landing, they decided to sail around the island, calling out to the colonists, playing English music, but never heard a response. So they waited until morning to walk ashore. When they finally made their way to the settlement, they found it completely abandoned. The buildings had all been dismantled as if they were preparing to move to a new location, but the site was littered with all of their supplies. Every chest and container was dug up and opened, with their contents spread everywhere. There was clothing, maps, tin, lead, iron, armor, all of them things they could have traded. They found the letters CRO carved into one tree and Croatoan carved into another. John White, noting there was no Maltese cross, tried to sail up to Croatoa to find them, but another vicious storm hit, tossing their ship 24 miles out to sea, forcing them to forfeit all but one of their anchors. Their ship, weighed down by Spanish loot, and their crew, exhausted from months of pillaging, refused to press their luck any further. Defeated, John White convinced himself that his daughter and granddaughter survived, integrating into the Croatoan culture, but would never know the truth, passing away only 3 years later. The colonists were never seen again. Recently, there's been a resurgence in the interest in the Roanoke colony. I've noticed quite a few articles pop up, and a lot of them are based on a new book that was just published, The Lost Colony and Hatteras Island. We read this book in preparation for this video, and it includes quite a few new details, including first-hand accounts from Governor John White and the Spanish, that put a new light on events. The way that John White describes the story leads me to believe that there was probably some kind of a cover-up. It reads almost like Homer's Odyssey, with ships being blown wildly out to sea, massive storms killing captains, and massive fires burning on ghost islands. I believe that John White found something, but he hid the truth to save himself and the crown from shame. So what really happened to the lost colony of Roanoke? Well, I think that they turned into zombies. I'm not joking. I know what you're thinking. This is ridiculous, Skeptic. How could you take any of this seriously? And trust me, I can't believe that I've come to this conclusion either. Last time I said that a dead human was the scariest thing, but I think I've changed my mind. Now I believe that an undead human, reanimated from the grave to eat its brethren, is far more terrifying. And out of everything that I've researched for this series, when you look at all of the facts, I think we'll find is far more likely. I'm not the first person to associate the Roanoke colony with zombies. There's a 5K zombie run charity event. Red Dead Redemption features Roanoke Ridge, home to cannibals. And even the Zombie Research Society lists the Roanoke mystery as a possible zombie plague. And it's quite easy to associate the disappearance of a large group of people with cannibalism. We have several examples of this in history. Just off the top of my head, I'm thinking the Jamestown colony, I'm thinking the Donner Party, I'm thinking about that airplane crash in the mountains with the hockey team. All of these scenarios have the same themes in common: starvation, desperation, isolation, and the cold. When John White's colonists arrived at Roanoke, they would have known it was too late in the season to grow enough crops to sustain them through the winter. So by the time Simon Fernando's ship abandoned them there, underprepared and under-resourced, it's quite possible that they too were looking down the barrel of a very desperate, hungry, isolated winter. Pop culture makes it quite easy for us to visualize people degenerating into a zombie-like creature. People pushed to the state of desperation can break, changing them forever, turning them into a shadow of the person they used to be, severing their connection from humanity. Today, zombies serve as a metaphor for consumerism. Zombies are a warning against selfishness and greed. That's why Dawn of the Dead took place in a mall.
We all know the description of one. Gaunt to the point of emaciation, desiccated skin pulled tightly over its bones, with its bones pushed out against its skin, its complexion, the ash gray of death, and its eyes pushed back deep into their sockets. A gaunt skeleton, recently disinterred from the grave. What lips it has are tattered and bloody, unclean and suffering from suppuration of the flesh, giving off a strange and eerie odor of decay and decomposition, of death and corruption.
Except that wasn't the description of a modern zombie that I just read to you. That was a direct quote from native Ontario scholar Basil H. Johnston, giving the description of a Wendigo. The Skeptic and Croatoan that lived near Roanoke spoke languages that belonged to the same family of languages that the Ontario natives speak, called Algonquin. I think it's reasonable to assume that the Skeptic and Croatoan would have had a similar belief structure about what happens to a large group of people when they're affected by the spirit of a Wendigo. Their tradition of sharing food with neighbors is partially connected to this belief of fighting off this evil spirit. Many natives believed that if their tribe was afflicted by selfishness and greed, that they were under attack by the spirit of a Wendigo. They would have known when the colonists arrived, they were not prepared to survive. By sharing their food, they were battling a demon of society, a tradition the Europeans depended on far too much. You see, the Croatoans would only have been able to give so much before they were putting their own people at risk. And the colonists had lots of metals, tools, weapons, armors, very precious to the Croatoans. But no amount of gold can replace food. Eventually, the colonists would have to be cut off. In their journals, European monks documented multiple accounts of people displaying bizarre behavior within a 60-year period of the Roanoke colony. The first written account was from Paul Le Jeune, a Jesuit missionary who lived with the Algonquin people in Quebec. he wrote, "The devilish woman added that the Wendigo had eaten some Atamatagukan. These are the tribes that live in the river that is called Trois-Rivières, and he would eat a great many more of them if he were not called elsewhere, but that Atkin werewolf would come in his place to devour them, even up to the French fort, that he would slaughter the French themselves." And in 1661, the Jesuit Relations reported, "Those poor men were seized with an ailment unknown to us, but not very unusual among the people we were seeking. They are afflicted with neither lunacy, hypochondria, nor frenzy, but a combination of all of these species of disease, which affects their imaginations and causes them a more than canine hunger. This makes them so ravenous for human flesh that they pounce upon women, children, and even upon men, like veritable werewolves, and devour them ferociously without being able to appease or glut their appetite, ever seeking fresh prey, and the more greedily the more they eat. This ailment attacked our deputies, and as death is the sole remedy among those simple people for checking such acts of murder, they were slain in order to stay the course of their madness." Just like our modern understanding of zombies, the only way to stop a Wendigo is through death. Being the fourth attempt to settle Roanoke, the Skeptic people would have had reason to believe that the colonists would turn desperate from hunger. The chief of the Skeptic tribe sent a band of warriors to scout and ambush the soldiers of Roanoke. They returned to the chief, telling him that they killed them with arrows, and when it was later revealed that the colonists were alive, the Skeptic believed that they were supernatural, that they had risen from the dead, seeping out the life force from healthy natives to sustain themselves. Then consider the disappearance of the 12 soldiers left on the island of Roanoke a year before. The colonists only found one skeleton, but the official account says that there were 2 soldiers killed, and the rest fled on a boat. So what happened to the other bodies? Could it be possible that these soldiers were the first to turn to Wendigos? And when the colonists arrived with John White, a settler named Howe was crabbing alone on the beach. He was killed with 15 arrows in an ambush, and later had his head smashed, similar to the type of skull desecration practiced in Europe when somebody was accused of being a vampire. Cultures around the world did this, almost as if the Skeptic were already aware of some sort of evil existing on the island. Something that really stuck out to me was in Governor John White's report. He said that his personal suit of armor had been dug up and left out in the elements to rust. This would have been precious to pirates, the Spanish, and the natives. The fire burning on the island of Roanoke, surrounded by footprints, shows that the Skeptic likely had a presence there. And history tells us that they revered metals like tin and copper. They would use them to fashion chest plates, armor, and ornaments to show status. So surely this commodity would have been looted. It doesn't make any sense that they were left behind to rust. So who dug them up? The Algonquin believed that fires are the biggest enemy of the Wendigo. By keeping a large fire burning, they would ward off attacks. Was the fire lit on Roanoke to keep the Wendigo at bay? Was it to keep the colonists from returning? Then there's the drowning deaths of the 7 sailors, including Captain Spicer, who was Governor John White's friend. That almost seems like a cover-up. What if they were actually victims of the zombie colonists? The colonists came to Roanoke assuming that they were going to get rich, hunting pelts, trading precious metals and tools. A lot of people don't realize that it was a private enterprise. They were there to make money for themselves, not for the Queen. They wouldn't have been given any training on how to survive the elements, how to build camps, even what kind of wild plants were safe to eat. They probably didn't even have an understanding of what the cold of winter would be like, and the painful hunger that it brings. It's quite likely that they were desperate and starving, and in no condition to trade. Definitely not to share. It's likely they would have been begging for handouts from the local natives. Before you go telling me that this is just some sort of native superstition, or that I'm talking crazy, I assure you that they are 100% correct. The craziest part is just how accurate their description of a Wendigo is. So far, I've focused pretty heavily on the gray zombie description of the Wendigo that suits my arguments for this video. But while doing research for this, I kept getting caught up on the more popular description of these creatures.
Usually, they're described as being massive, hairy creatures with large antlers, big chunks of flesh hanging from exposed bone. They mindlessly stalk you through the wilderness for hours and behave soulless, devoid of spirit and purpose. They have an insatiable hunger, and every time they eat, they get larger.
How does this relate to what I'm talking about? How does a moose that's an herbivore become a zombie-like creature that hunts humans? This is the part that I found really interesting.
The most famous prion disorder is mad cow disease, caused when farmers mixed beef byproduct into their cow feed, changing their cattle's behavior, causing them to shake uncontrollably.
There's a human form of mad cow known as Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, caused by the transmission of abnormally folded protein. This causes symptoms such as tremors and loss of coordination due to neurodegeneration. If we eat the brain or small intestine of an animal that has mad cow, we would suffer from similar symptoms.
In 1950, a large group of people in Papua New Guinea began suffering from a similar condition they call Kuru disease, contracted through the ceremonial consumption of their relatives as part of their funeral rites. The disease lays dormant for decades sometimes before symptoms arise.
But certain types of prion diseases can transmit through blood and saliva as well, meaning if an infected animal bit you and its saliva entered your system, you could get it then too. An instinctive practice of North American grazing animals like horses, deer, moose is to eat the feces of other grazing animals if they're lacking in nutrients or vitamins. These animals will also cannibalize parts of their own dead for nutrients in times when food is scarce. It doesn't happen that often, but it has been seen in nature. There's also a condition known as chronic wasting disease that has been observed in deer. Animals suffering from this have milky gray eyes, rotting flesh, and the colloquial term for this condition, zombie deer. Global warming and climate change are contributing to this condition in modernity. The colonists arrived in Roanoke at the end of a mini ice age, a weather event that could have triggered the same behavior in 1587. The island of Roanoke was rich with deer. It's likely the settlers ate exclusively deer meat for their first winter. And just like mad cow, though it hasn't been seen yet, there's a possibility this condition can transmit zoonotically to humans. In fact, the Wildlife Commission is warning that this condition is likely to transmit to humans. Likely, as in expect it to happen. And just because it's 2020 and I love being the harbinger of bad news, there seems to be a new zombie deer outbreak taking hold right now. So back to Wendigos looking like moose. Moose already basically act like a Wendigo, obsessively stalking people through the wilderness.
He chased me through the forest a good 300-400 yards. I couldn't do it anymore, so I scurried up the tree. I held on to this about 10 feet up, and this 1,500 pounds of raging bull moose started breaking branches, grunting, stomping, snorting, knocking small trees down. He was around there, circling around. I hit the ground, I ran again. As soon as I started running in the bush again, bam, he was right on me again. He was following me through the bush.
Well, this disease can also affect moose. This is where natives get their image of the rotting moose-like monster, stalking them through the wilderness, tormenting their settlements and villages. The only thing that can deter them is fire, because in this state, animals suffering from this condition only understand the world through their most base instincts. And they still know that fire is bad. By this point, that's all they understand. The natives of America tried to save the settlers from themselves. They tried to stop the colonists from becoming Wendigos. And in the spirit of Thanksgiving, I feel it's important that we reflect on the lessons from the past, to acknowledge our own failures, and try to learn from our mistakes. The Croatoan tried to teach us to take care of each other. They tried to show us the virtues of altruism, sharing, and giving. The celebration of Thanksgiving somewhat acknowledges the goodwill of the First Nations people, but seems to ignore the irony of the outcome. I think we need to stop seeing people's kindness as a weakness and stop feeling entitled to the sacrifices of others. Happy Thanksgiving. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned for part 2. Make sure to hit subscribe and the notification bell now. And if you guys want to check out my second channel, I do a follow-up to every single video in this series where I respond to some of my favorite comments.